Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. Here's a video to go along with today's lesson, and what we did today was we continued working on our BrickOut game, putting the top status bar where we're going to put the title of our game as well as some statistics updating regarding how the player's doing in the current round. So that's going to be what we do today, and the primary thing that we're going to be learning is how do we add text to the window. So, to make this work, we are going to be making a new class. So down here, we're going to make a new class. And what did I call it in our class today? I can't remember immediately. I think that I called it the status bar. That sounds pretty good. We'll call it status bar. And so this is going to have a couple different functions in it, like the constructor function, which is going to only need a single thing passed to it, besides, the self that you always have to do for any kind of class function. So self, and then the other thing that we're going to give it is window, which is the window that we are going to be placing our status bar on. And so we can just say self dot window equals window. Just like how we've done in all of our other objects. Like in our ball class here, we pass the game entirely, but then we say self.window equals window. So all of our classes have done that so far. This is not any different. What is different is the other parameters that we're going to be setting. So, for example, we need to set what is the title of our game. So self.title is going to be called BrickOut. And let's do an exclamation mark as well. Beauty. Another thing that we need to do is we need to set the font size. So I'm going to say self.font. Font size. Sorry. Font size. And I'm going to set it equal to 40 point. That seems like a pretty reasonable size. One thing that you're going to want to know is that anytime you want to write something in a different size, you're going to need to make a different font for it. So, we're going to make everything just the same font to see how it's done. But if you want to change things up, use different fonts, use different size of text, etc., you need to make different fonts for every different size that you want to make. We also need to set the background color. So I'm going to say self.background color. And we'll do orange. What else do we need? That's pretty much it that we can define right away. But we do need to make that font, as I said. And we need to do that in the constructor function because apparently it did not work very well in the before the constructor function. And actually, we don't need self here either. Whenever we are defining class parameters outside of a function, the self is kind of already there, so we can just refer to the variable names directly. So we need to do self.font, and we need now to make the fonts that we're going to be using for all of our text. And the way we do that is going to be a font, and we're going to be using a sys font, which means system fonts. So these are not fonts that are in Pygame at all. These are fonts that exist in the system, your computer system, like Windows. So it's using a system font. And pretty much most of the fonts that you are familiar with using like Microsoft Word or Google Docs or whatever, all those fonts should also end up being here as well because those are also system fonts. And so you should be able just to type in the name of the font that you want. And I'm going to do Arial. Capital A. Like that. So that is going to be the type of font that we use, the Arial font. And the second thing that we need to tell it is what is the size of the fonts that we're going to use. And so that's going to be self.font size. And so this, whoops, there we go. So this is how we create the font. This is creating the font that we're going to use for all of our text. It's going to be 40 point, and it's going to be of this type Arial. If you wanted to mix it up, then you would need to make different fonts for each different thing that you want to apply it to. Alright? And that's pretty much it that we need to do in our constructor function. Our constructor function is actually pretty simple. Now, we need to kind of define what are the other functions that we are going to have. The main function that is really important is our draw function. So all the other ones had draw functions, this is also going to have a draw function. But unlike the other ones, this draw function is going to have parameters. Because we're not going to have our status bar keep track of what the values are of the different stats that we're going to track. We're going to let our game class keep track of all that stuff because it makes more sense for the game class to keep track of those stats. And we will just pass those stats to our status bar whenever we need to draw it. So we're going to do the draw function. Self, as always, as the first argument. And we're going to give it two more arguments. We are going to have one stat is going to be how many balls they've lost. So I'm going to say balls lost. And the second thing that we're going to be doing is how many bricks do they have remaining. So I'm going to say bricks remaining. Actually, better yet, let's do bricks left. A little bit shorter. And that's going to be the two things that we're going to be displaying in our status bar besides the title of our game. But in order to get our draw function to work, we're going to need to have some extra helper functions that are going to make it easier for us. So one function, I'm going to call it the makeText function, which is going to use our font and generate a text object. And so the text, to make the text, of course self, but we need to know what is the text that we're going to be putting in, what is that string that we want to write, and the other thing that we need to know is what color do we want this text to be. So I'm going to say text color. And so this function is going to be really straightforward. It's going to create a text object using our font, putting in this text and that color. So we can write this in a single line. It's just going to return. So we need to use the font that we have made. So self.font, we're going to use that font object that we've created. And we are going to call its render function. And it's going to render a new text for us. And this needs to have 4 different parameters. 3 of them are necessary. The last one is not necessary, but it does help in performance, especially for what we're going to be using it for. So the first thing that it needs to know, of course, is what do we want to write to this thing. So text is the first parameter. The second parameter is a Boolean, true or false, do we want anti-aliasing. So aliasing is whenever you get like a diagonal line on the computer screen and it kind of has a little bit of a jaggy look to it, if you look closely, that's called aliasing. And that is an artifact due to image compression. Anti-aliasing smooths out all that jagginess so that you get still a nice diagonal line without all those kind of jaggy aspects to it. So in order to make things nice, or look nice, we will put in true as the next one because we want to have anti-aliasing. After that, we need to tell it what color do we want this thing to be. So text color is the third argument. And finally, this last one is an optional one, but it's what is the background color. And this is really good, especially when you're using anti-aliasing, is it will actually help with making this run faster if it knows ahead of time what the background that this text is going to be on. Otherwise, it has to do a little bit extra work to figure that out. So that's why we're going to give it the background color also. Background color. And that is it. That is our entire makeText function. But rather than having to do this a whole bunch of times, now we can just call this smaller function. It'll do all that work for us. So after we make the text, then we need to have another function that will place the text for us. And this is responsible for determining where on the screen is it going to show up and actually doing the drawing of the text itself. So, once again, it needs self, and this is going to have actually a number of parameters. It's going to take in the text that we're going to be placing. It's going to actually be using this text object that this returns. So whatever this returns, that's what that text is going to be. It's not going to be a string anymore. And then we need to give it the X and the Y position that we're going to want to place it in. And finally, we're going to make an optional parameter that I'm going to call centered. I'm going to say centered equals false. And so we can use that in order to say, do we want to pass in the center position of where we want the text to be, or do we want to refer to the top left corner of where the text is going to be? And we'll have that option to do either or. Do we want to use X and Y as the top left corner, or do we want to use X and Y as the center of the text? And so this is going to be a little bit of a longer one. But basically what we need to do is we need to, this text that's creating here has a rectangle object attached to it. And it's going to already have what is the size of our text object, but it's not going to have the position set up yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to do text box, and we're going to get that rectangle so that we can set the location of it. And then we can use it in order to draw our text. So that is going to be text dot get rect, son. So get the rectangle. Once we have that rectangle, then we need to know, okay, are we centering this around the coordinates xy, or is xy the top left corner? So I'm going to say if centered. So if we're centering this text, then we're going to do text box center, and we're going to set the center position to XY. Just like that. And so whenever it's centered, that's how we make sure that the center is where it's supposed to be. Otherwise, if we're not centering it, then we're going to put it so that the top left corner is at that position. And so we're going to do text box, and we're going to move it, but we're not just going to move it, we're going to move it in place. So that is what IP stands for in this context. It means in place. And the main difference between move and move in place is if we move in place, we do not need to reassign our rectangle object to the variable again. It will automatically change the text box rectangle to the new location. Otherwise, we need to do something like this. Text box move, and then text box equals text box dot move, and then where we're moving it to. So that's how we'd have to do it if we weren't using the in place method. But since we're doing it in place, we do not have to assign what this thing is doing. And we're going to move it in place, and move it in place to the position XY. Just like that. So that takes care of setting the position of our text. The last thing that we need to do is we need to draw the text onto the screen, and this time we're going to use a different kind of draw function. So I'm going to self, and we're going to call the window function, or the window object that it's drawing to, and we're going to blit. I don't actually know what blit stands for, but basically what it means is we're going to be pasting our text onto the window. And so whatever we blit in here, it has to have what it is that we're putting there. The thing that we're putting there is the text object that we created. And where is it going to go? We need to give it the rectangle object that we created, which is the text box. Like that. And so this is kind of like a draw function. It says draw the text object in this location, is basically what it's saying. The main difference is this blit allows you to draw just a part of the screen, not the entire screen. And it can be really useful if you have a lot of different things happening in your game. A lot of things, or a lot of different objects. It can be a big benefit to just redraw the part of the screen that has changed, rather than the entire screen where a big chunk of the screen hasn't changed. So we're not going to get too much into that because it's an optimization thing doesn't add a whole lot, and I'd be actually kind of surprised if any of you ran into the issue that you had to do this kind of optimization. But just to know, that is a possibility. You can just redraw part of the screen and just focus on redrawing the parts where things are changing and ignoring the parts that are staying the same. And so that's our place text function. That's it. That's all it needs to do. So it's going to get the rectangle, place the rectangle where it's supposed to go, and then draw the text where it's supposed to be drawn. And that's our place text. So now we can take a look at our draw function. And so we are going to do just one thing right away, and then we're going to test this, make sure that it works. And when we're drawing our status bar, we need to create the background rectangle that is going to cover the entire thing. And after we made that background, then we can start placing all of our text on top of it. If we do the background last, it's going to just go over top of our text. So we got to do that first. And so we're going to draw a rectangle on our window, and we, let me take a look. So we need to give it the color. It's the background color. Self.background color. Looks like background is supposed to be lowercase b. And then we need to give basically the rectangle object that has the position and the length and the width of this rectangle. But to simplify it, let's just create the kind of a rectangle object here. It's just going to be a tuple. That will make this a little bit easier to read rather than have one big long line. So first we need to give where it is the top left corner of this rectangle. And since it's going to be going in the very top, it's going to start from the top left corner of the window, which is at 0, 0. So super easy. Then we need to have it go all the way across the entire window. So our window size is 1200, but we are going to once again use the getWidth function for our window, so that if we do change our window size, we don't have to worry about changing all this stuff too. It will automatically get handled for us. So I'm going to say self.window, and we're going to get width. That is how long this thing should be. And finally, it should be 100 pixels tall, because that is how much space we allocated for the top bar. If you remember, in our draw function, nope, down here. Where is it? I don't know where we put it. Whoopsies. Oh, doesn't matter. But yeah, maximum up was 100 below where it could go. So that is why that's 100. Because we have that 100 pixel spot right at the top that we are going to put everything in. And so then we're going to pass this rectangle tuple as the third argument. Just like that. Actually, you know, it might be useful for us to do this right in our, or at least make this thing in our constructor function here, so it only happens once. Then it's only constructed rather than having to create this rectangle object every time we call the draw function. So a little bit of a performance advantage if we do move this to here, and then we'll do self.rect, so that's a class parameter, and that way we only need to run this part of the code once rather than every time that we call the draw function, which is every frame. So a little bit of a speed up. Probably won't even notice it, but it's good to think about these things. And so that should, when we run this, now give us a nice orange strip right at the top of our game. Let's try it out. Actually, no, that won't. Because we haven't, while we created our status bar class, we haven't actually created our status bar in our main function. So we need to go to our main function right up here, our game. And in our constructor function, Well, one thing we need to do is we need to create our status bar. So self dot status bar equals status bar, and we need to give it self dot window as its parameter, because in our constructor function we need to pass it this window. So that creates our status bar. Excellent. Now we need to call the draw function of our status bar right here. So self dot what do you call it? Status bar dot draw, and our status bar draw function, even though we haven't actually used any of it, does require 2 parameters. So let's actually just initialize those initially, create their initial values, and then when we get to the end of this, we will look at updating those values. And so those are actually both going to be made in our constructor function here. So right away, I can say self dot balls lost is going to start off at 0, and then we can count all the bricks that we're making in this loop. So we can say self dot bricks left, that's I'm going to say lowercase b, is going to start off at 0, and every time we create a new brick, we're going to add 1 to the number of bricks left. So self dot bricks left plus equals 1. Beauty. So that will create our initial values for the number of bricks and also how many balls are lost. We'll have to update that in a moment. But now in our constructor draw function, we can now pass it those 2 parameters. In what order do we need to give them? Balls lost and then bricks left. So self dot balls lost, self dot bricks left, and once again lowercase b. There we go. So yeah, now we should be ready to test this thing, and we should get a nice orange bar. There it is. Look at that. We got an orange bar at the top. Woo! But at least it's working. So now that we got confirmed that our orange bar is being drawn, now we can put all the text there. And we got all the helper functions that we need, the make text and the place text. So now in our draw function, we can just call our place text function a couple times in order to place all the text. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to put the title in our status bar. So self dot place text, and the text that needs to place is going to be made by our make text function. So self dot make text, and we need to pass it the title, or self dot title of our game, and also what color do we want our text to be, and let's just say we want it to be black. So that is the first argument in our place text, but remember our place text also needs to know the x, the y, and we are going to need to tell it whether we want it centered. And in this case we are going to want it centered. So notice that I put a comma and then I hit enter. I'm going to put more parameters down on this line right here. This is a good way to do it when you're calling a function that has many parameters, rather than have it extend all the way across the entire screen and possibly even farther. It's much better to have as much of your code on the screen at all times. So, just to avoid having to have a really long line of code that we might have to scroll over, I'm going to put the rest of the code down on this line here. So, the X position is going to be, I'm actually going to center it, so middle is at 600, and we're going to go 50 down. And then we need to say centered equals true. There we go. And you can see when I put in that last bracket, it closed up with that one, so we're all good. And that should also now put our title in there. We are going to do the same thing with our others. So we're going to do self.placeText, self.makeText. So calling our makeText function to create our text object. This time, let's do how many blocks are remaining. So I'm going to make an F string. I'm going to say blocks left is going to be, and then bricks left. Bricks left. So that's going to be our string. Let's call it bricks rather than blocks. And what else do we need to tell it? We need to tell it what color it's going to be. It's going to be black again. Once again, I'm going to put the other arguments on the next line just to make it a little bit cleaner. Actually, I suppose we could do it all in one line here. We only need to give it a couple numbers. So I'm going to put this on the left-hand side. So I'm not going to center it. I'm going to put the top left corner. I'm just going to move it 10 pixels in from the very far edge. And well, our font is 40. So I am going to want to put this about 30 down. And that should make it so that it's right in the middle of our text there. Or right in the middle of our status bar. And now we can do one more. Place text. Self.makeText. This is also going to be an F string. And this is going to be how many balls have been lost. Which is going to be equal to balls lost. That's the thing that we want to display. And let's make this black also. Whoops. Black. Perfect. And this is going to go more to the other side, so maybe we'll say, I don't know, 800. And we'll move this 30 down also. There we go. That should be everything that we need to do to now have our text show up. So let's run this thing and see if we got some text up there. Uh-oh. Name error. Text box is not defined. I did exactly the same thing. That's supposed to be a capital B, ain't it? Whoopsies. Alright, line 91. Show my line numbers. 81, 91. There we go. Text box. Text box. That's better. Try it again. Yeah, look at that. So we got BrickOut. It's right, nice and centered. Looks good. We got bricks left and balls lost. Not updating. As you can see, we've knocked out a number of bricks already and nothing is going away. And this is not going to update the balls lost either. Nope. So, that's the next thing that we need to do. We do now have at least this stuff showing up, so we now know how to add the text to our screen. But we need to have it update properly. So, first one we're going to do is the bricks left, because that's the easy one to update. And this is going to happen in our update function of our main game class. And here is where we're checking to see whether or not we've collided with a brick. And so, one last thing, we're going to bounce, we're going to remove that brick, and we're also going to subtract 1 from the number of bricks left. Bricks left minus equals 1. So remove 1 because we've now hit 1. And that's all that we need to do to update the function. Let's actually run this thing and show now whenever we hit a brick, it's going to count down. Alright, now it's going to be really slow, ain't it? But you saw it. It started at like 84 or something. Alright, now in order to get the whenever the balls are lost to update, that ball being lost is happening in our ball object down here. So in our update function, right here is where we are checking to see whether or not the ball has fallen off the bottom. Which means here is where we need to do our updating. But our updating variable that keeps track of that is not part of the ball class. It's part of our game class. So what we're going to do is we're already passing the game class to our ball. We're actually just going to say self.game equals game. So make it into a class parameter so that we can access it in our update function. And now that we have a pointer to our game class, down here we can now access that variable. So we can self.game, and now we can access the balls lost. And that is going to be plus equals 1. Add 1 to that. Let's make sure that I have this right. So back up here, did I call it balls lost? I did. So that should now take care of updating the other one. So just to go back, what we did was in our ball class, we made a new class parameter called game. So we'll be able to access the game class from our ball class. And then from the game class, we access the ball lost parameter and add 1 to it. So if we run this thing, we will now have everything updating. Looking good. And now let's lose a ball. Look at that. Losing all sorts of balls. Beauty. And there we go. That is everything that I wanted to cover in today's class. So, main thing is that we learned how to add text, and we also saw how do we make it so that our text can update as the game plays. So, pretty important features. Next time we are going to do some polishing, so we'll make it so that the ball does not get easily caught inside of our paddle anymore. It's not going to be a perfect solution, but it will be a pretty good one. I would like to try to get to adding sounds as well as sprites. So I'm thinking maybe we'll make the ball into a sprite, and then we'll have like a little bounce sound for whenever it hits something. As well as we're going to add a pause button, because every good game should have a pause button. So that is what I would like to do for next time, and due to Monday being a holiday, we're going to not have class until next Wednesday. So, anyways, that is what I wanted to show you today. Have a good one, and I'll see you all next time. Adios.